Part 3 is this one where it's got the picture of the tree trunk in the background. So let's just play that and see what he says.
It's another lie when you can't really believe, because you've revealed at other times that you know better. As you have already admitted, different layers do exist, and certain strata are identified by particular fossils that are only found in those layers. You can't explain that, and that already refutes your mythic flood.
Mr. Nelson, I can explain it just fine. Certain fossils are found in certain layers because during any flood, just like our little sand toy that you hate so much, it sorts automatically by density. See, reptiles and birds have a different body density. So if a billion of them drowned in a big catastrophic world event like Noah's flood, the water shuffling them up and down, back and forth, moving around for several months, is going to automatically sort them where all the birds are on top. They have hollow bones, hollow feathers. That's why they're in the same layer, not because of evolution. It's because of hydrologic sorting. You've been corrected on this before, but you cannot seem able to learn, okay? The reptiles are found in a similar layer because reptiles have a similar body density. They're sorted on... I covered this all on video number 6. Watch video 6, Mr. Nelson. I'll send you a copy free if you'd like, okay?
Which we know for certain could not and definitely did not really happen.
So you know for certain Noah's flood could not and did not happen. Explain why it could not happen. If the crust of the earth flexes up and down, in my globe that the flat earthers hate, ouch. By the way, the Flat Earth Society is spreading around the globe. Yeah. If the crust of the earth flexes up and down like we know it does, I mean the crust of the earth is about 10 miles thick. That is thinner than the paper on this globe if you do it scaled up like that. The thickness of this paper would be too much to represent the crust of the earth. Yeah, a piece of paper is the thickness. So inside it's molten magma and other things, and the earth is flexing a little bit. Just because of the spin, it bulges out, I think, 26 miles compared to the pole. The poles collapse a little bit. It's still rounder and smoother than a cue ball. If you shrunk it down to the size of a cue ball, kept everything the same, you couldn't find Mount Everest on the cue ball if it was shrunk down that small. It's smoother and rounder than the cue ball. But it is bulged a little bit at the equator, and don't make any comments about me, okay? So that's not because I'm spinning. But Anna, be quiet, okay? So the crust of the earth flexing up and down. Suppose the higher parts of the earth, like the mountain ranges, continents, sank down a couple of miles. Their average heights of the continents is only 2.5 miles high. That's from here to the other side of Lennox. That's the average height of the continents. Mount Everest is only 5 miles high. That's from here to Repton. That's the tallest mountain in the world. Okay? Oceans average 13,000 feet deep. Over 2 miles deep. That's the average. If you smooth out the crust of the earth, the water would be 1.6 miles deep everywhere. What do you mean Noah's flood could not happen? You're insane, sir. It certainly could happen. There's enough water here to cover the earth 1.5 miles deep. Stop saying dumb stuff like that. You refuse to learn. I'll correct you again, though. Okay. Sweetly, in Christian love.
I've got a whole series citing professional scientists and the facts to prove that, but...
You got a whole series of professional scientists citing facts to prove it could not be a flood. You're hanging around the wrong crowd, son. You need to get some intelligent people to hang around, okay?
That's beyond the point here. The point here is that in the 19th century, these fossils that are only found in specific layers were referred to as index fossils to tell the layers apart. And that's where we get the names Cambrian, Devonian, Jurassic, and so on.
Correct. They found certain fossils on certain layers and said, wow, reptiles are generally found in this layer. So they gave it a name. You still don't get it. That's hydrologic sorting from Noah's flood. That's not proof of a different era. You guys refuse to believe that, though.
But the only way to date the layers was relative to each other, being aware that one layer of dirt obviously had to be younger than the one below it. And
that's the mistake. One layer had to be younger than the one below it. That is not true. Not if they're deposited horizontally. Tell you what, I can make about 20 layers in about 3 minutes on this thing, all at the same time. Huh. You're simply mistaken, Mr. Nelson. You've been corrected on this many times, but you refuse to listen or learn.
Older than the one above it.
That is not
true.
true.
Your sand art toy shows that those layers had to go down in this order.
A sand art toy.
However, we initially couldn't actually date the rocks because, as you well know, the fossils don't give any indication as to how old each layer is.
Now notice what he just admitted. The fossils don't give any indication of how old the layers are. Are you saying you don't know the age of the fossils then, without dating it from the layer? I'll show you right from the books later, well, there's not time tonight, but they date the fossils by which layer they're found in. But then they date the layers by which type of fossils are found in them. Complete circular reasoning. Watch my video number 4 for more on that.
The first attempt to date them was an attempt to date the age of the Earth as a whole. Lord Kelvin, who was one of Darwin's contemporaries and a critic of evolution in favor of intelligent design, used the laws of thermodynamics, which he devised himself, to conclude that the Earth and the Sun both had to be at least 20 million years old.
Hold it. You are simply mistaken, sir, or deliberately lying. He might have concluded that it would take 20 million years for the Earth, at the rate it was cooling. He was using the laws of thermodynamics, the rate of the Earth losing heat. He said, okay, our crust is X number of miles thick. It's losing so much heat per day. Wow, it would take 20 million years to cool from a molten mass to what it is. Well, that's assuming it started as a molten mass. Duh. What if it started created for man to live on, and since then it's cooled down a few degrees? So Lord Kelvin did not prove it's at least 20 million years old. You are simply lying or mistaken. You've been corrected on this before. I'll continue. I enjoy correcting you on stuff like this. I have a blast, and I'm sick. Wait till I get healthy. Okay.
Then he found out about nuclear fusion and the heat produced within the Earth by radioactive decay, and he was forced to push his estimates out much further. As you well know, there was a period of many years where the more these pioneers learned about radioactive decay, the older things turned out to be.
No, Mr. Nelson, it's not the older the things turned out to be because they learned about carbon dating and stuff like that, radiometric dating. It's the more time they needed to turn their frog to a prince. They realized all the problems with turning a frog to a prince and said, whoa, this isn't long enough, we need more time. They keep adding time because they're desperate to turn their frog to a prince. That's why they keep adding more time.
Until we now have several different concordant methods of radiometrically dating some geologic strata reliably, using radioisotopes rather than index fossils. So,
okay, we have a whole series, a whole video on that, radiometric dating and the problems associated with it. It's called radiocarbon dating. What is it, $10 in the bookstore? $15, just call 855-BIG-DINO, extension 1. They say the mind is the first thing to go. I couldn't believe it. I went into a nursing home in my hometown back in East Peoria, you know, just to visit some friends. And I asked the lady at the nurse there, I said, ma'am, do you know who I am? She patted me. She said, no, but if you go over to the counter, they can tell you who you are. That hurt so bad. Okay.
So that it is not circular reasoning as you allege, nor is it interpretation because it is objectively verifiable.
You are simply mistaken, sir, or lying to your constituents. It is not proven that those layers are different ages. I'll show you in a minute. All of the textbooks will say there is such a thing as a geologic column, and they've got the names for them: Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, Permian, Carboniferous, etc. In the early 1800s, this was made up, completely made up. Up until that time, everybody thought, hey, the flood of Noah deposited all these layers.
But then they began to realize just a few of the many reasons why your global flood could not and certainly did not happen.
Okay, I would like to see a list of those reasons. I will answer every one. So if some of you sun god followers have a list of those, say, what are the reasons why a flood couldn't happen? Tell me, list them for me carefully. I'll answer all of them. It could happen. It did happen.
Just knowing that the Earth is a spheroid is enough to show the mathematic impossibility of your flood.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Because the Earth is a spheroid, by that he means it's not quite exactly a sphere. It's bulged a little, you know, pulling the poles in. That proves there couldn't be a flood? You disciples of Mr. Nelson, use your head. It doesn't prove any such thing. How could anybody believe such a thing? You're saying a round ball, or nearly round ball, like the Earth, can't be flooded because it's round? 70% is underwater right now. Duh!
So it was obviously just a fable, adopted and adapted from the legends of previous polytheism.
Whoa, whoa. It's obviously just a fable, adopted and adapted from previous... No. It's obviously, certainly possible, mathematically. You said it's mathematically impossible. What do you mean? There's enough water to cover the Earth 1.6 miles deep. And the fact that the fact that Moses collected and edited the 10 eyewitness accounts into the book of Genesis, all written by eyewitnesses. Noah actually wrote chapter 5 and part of 6. Okay, you can tell where the breaks are. There's 10 authors in Genesis. It says these are the generations of. I covered that on video number 7. But he didn't prove any such thing that it couldn't happen. These other people Moses collected this about 1,000 years after the flood. 1,000 years after the flood, Moses' life takes place. And so he writes about the flood. Now, before that, do you think if there was a worldwide flood, Do you think Noah's kids would get off that boat and tell their kids about it? At some point, the kids are going to get big enough. Hey, Daddy, how come we're the only people in the whole world? Oh, son, let me tell you about the flood. And so flood legends would carry with all the people as they spread out from the Tower of Babel. So, of course, there would be dozens. There's over 300 flood legends. Go to the website creationism.org, and he's got nearly all of them right there. You can read the legend for yourself. Now, the further you get away from the event, the more the legends get stretched and twisted and stuff like that. Like the Cherokee Indians teach that the Sky Woman fell down and a giant turtle came up and saved her, and that giant turtle is now North America. Okay, I'm sure the legends get stretched over time with the telling, you know. But after you pass on a legend verbally, generation after generation, of course it's going to get stretched. Do you ever play the game telephone where you go around the circle, got to tell the story? It don't come back anything close to what it was. So, Mr. Nelson, you are not correct. Okay, I'm sorry. You've been corrected on this before. I'll correct you one more time. Noah's flood did happen, and the fact that there were legends written down before Moses actually wrote his down does not mean he copied it from them. He got it straight from, probably on clay tablets, from descended from whoever the patriarch was is passing this down, and Noah actually wrote chapter 5 and part of chapter 6. Verse 6-9 is where it breaks. Anyway.
And exaggerated to impossible proportions, so that he...
And I agree. Some of the flood stories are exaggerated to impossible proportions. For instance, one of the flood legends says Noah's Ark was a cube. I don't know where my cube earth is. Here we go. They say Noah's Ark was a big cube. That'd be extremely unstable in the water, I would think. Okay, it'd be constantly rolling all over the place, right? No, it was not a cube. The Bible gives it correct. And by the way, the Bible dimensions a 6-to-1 ratio of length to width is perfect. All the Liberty ships of World War I were built to that same ratio, width to length ratio. They said this isn't the fastest, but this is the most stable on stormy waters. The most stable dimensions you can get. 6-to-1 ratio. How did Noah know that? How did Moses know that to write it down? Maybe it's true. One atheist said, well, see, that ratio is not the fastest. Noah wasn't trying to go anywhere. Where was there to go? Think about it for 5 minutes, okay?
Even in the 1800s, no serious geologist could seriously believe Noah's flood.
You got to be insane, sir, to believe such a thing. Many serious geologists believe Noah's flood and still do today. Right. But I don't care if nobody believes it. That doesn't make it impossible. You don't judge. This is an appeal to authority, which he does all the time, a logical fallacy. Well, nobody else believes that, therefore this is right. Doesn't matter. Go to North Korea. See how many people believe in capitalism. Just go check. See? They're right. Communism's the only thing that works. You don't believe that? I don't believe that. Okay, anybody else want to not believe it? Oh, okay, I believe.
And that was before we found Ashurbanipal's library and discovered that the story of Noah was taken from an earlier tale that was originally dedicated to other gods.
That is not correct, sir. Other people wrote the stories down, like I just mentioned. They're still around. Go to Paul Abrams' website. Abramson. Paul Abramson, yeah. And he's got 300 of them listed right there. You can read them all. And some are greatly exaggerated. But I think the fact that there's legends at all is a good indication that it happened. It's not proof. And Noah didn't copy it, or Moses didn't copy it from them. He had the correct version. If there's a car accident and 5 people witness it, the cop comes and he wants to get their eyewitness testimony. Does the first one to testify have it correct? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the 5th one in line to testify has the correct story. So you're an idiot to think because somebody wrote it down before Noah did, or Moses did, therefore they got it right. Ask any police officer anywhere. That's common sense 101. All of those layers were formed in 1 year, as is demonstrated by polystrata fossils, petrified trees standing up.
Wrong again, as always. You're repeating another one of those claims that was long known to be false. It might appear by the copyright that this claim was debunked a quarter of a century ago, but in fact it was debunked a century and a half ago in the first publication describing this phenomenon. A polystrate tree is here demonstrated by a lycopod. Now these plants are related to today's club mosses, but this is an entirely extinct species.
The club moss today gets about 15 inches tall. These things got over 100 feet tall. I think that's maybe a clear indication that the Bible is correct, that everything was perfect and bigger before the flood. Bigger people, bigger reptiles. We call them dinosaurs today. but they were just big reptiles from before the flood. Probably everything was bigger. The people lived to be 900. So the fact that you can show a picture of a 100-foot tall club moss ought to get some brain juices going somewhere, unless you're out of fluid.
That grew to 100 meters tall in the Carboniferous period. It has roots that have grown through what is now solidly compressed rock, which was obviously soft soil at that time.
Would you show me the pictures of those roots up real close? Everybody I've talked to that sees these things said they're founded on top of a bed of clay or coal that wouldn't support a tree growth at all. So you think you're dreaming about this root stuff, but if you find one that has roots, I'll show you pictures in a minute, that'll disprove all this malarkey.
That time. And then it evidently grew near a river system in which there were seasonal floods, creating numerous very thin layers around the base of this plant.
Okay, listen to what he said. It grew near a river system, and there were multiple seasonal floods that each one deposited a new layer. So it's going to get all these layers a little bit at a time. I would think that'd be kind of hard on the plant to survive, don't you? I'll show you some other real problems with this. So you sun worshippers, sun god worshippers, should use your head, okay? Don't just listen to this guy. Use some common sense logic. I'll show you in just a minute.
As you can see by the illustration, this tree grew through 3 noticeably different depositional environments, implying changing conditions where some periods were drier or wetter than others. And these type fossils can also be found with occasional deposits of volcanic ash or arid dust being blown in between recurrent periods of seasonal inundation.
He throws in the word seasonal inundation. During Noah's flood, you would have, with the crust of the earth is cracked up, you'd get volcanoes going off at the same time. So it's very highly likely you would get ash layers, mud layers, and maybe another ash layer. I think that it's chaos. See, the Bible says in 2 Peter, the scoffers are willingly ignorant of that flood. Because that flood demonstrates clearly God has authority to judge his creation. And you've been warned about this before, Mr. Nelson. You're going to be judged by that same God you don't believe in. And it's like somebody can go to prison and bang their coffee cup on the bars. I don't believe in this place. I don't believe in this place.
Because these are different layers of mud and silt, washed up, wet, and then drying before the next layer comes.
Washed up, wet, and then drying. Listen to what he said here. They washed up wet and then dried before the next layer comes on top. So you got dozens of layers. They're going to wash up, dry. Another one washes up and dries. Listen to this.
All while the tree is still growing here.
Okay, so Mr. Nelson, if the tree is still growing here, like you said, wouldn't these bottom layers that are already hardened, if the tree is still growing, wouldn't they show some fracture marks, internal fracture marks? You got a layer of mud coming right up to a tree. It's now hard, turning to mudstone or rock, okay? Now that you're saying the tree is still growing inside this hardened mud, rock, isn't that going to push it and have a fracture zone around there? Show me some real close-up pictures of these where you actually can prove the tree was still growing. You are making this up, sir. And you poor disciples that follow this guy, use your head.
To the point that it becomes this wide, we know that this could not have happened in just 1 year.
You're correct. It could not grow through hundreds of layers and get that wide in 1 year. It got ripped up by the flood, and all those layers got deposited probably in a few weeks or a month while the flood water's washing back and forth. See, this is something very few people talk about. The moon pulls the tide up, right? If the earth is spinning, the moon doesn't care. It's pulling a bump up, and the bump is always under the moon. But to the people on the earth, they see the bump go up and down, high tide, low tide. If the earth was covered with water, just smooth out, push the continents down, raise the ocean beds up, it'd be 1.5 miles of water everywhere. People have studied this and said, wow, those tides would become harmonic. It'd be a 200-foot tidal change every 6 hours and 25 minutes. It would be every 6 hours, high tide, low tide, high tide, because, 24 hours around the earth, except while the earth is spinning, the moon is also moving. So that's why it's 6 hours and 25 minutes. Who cares? I just lost interest. Anyway, so this 200-foot bump coming up is going to have to get a lot of water to fill that bump. From where? Sideways. The water is moving sideways while the bump comes up at the same speed the earth is spinning. 883 miles an hour in Lenox, Alabama. At the equator, 1,037.6, I think. So if you have water moving sideways at 800 miles an hour, while it's filling a bump, and then the bump goes back down, so now the water rushes the other way. You got water rushing back and forth every 6 hours and 25 minutes. We don't know how long it covered Lenox, Alabama, but Noah was in the ark for a year. Certainly covered Lennox for a couple of months, I would think. Maybe the whole year. We don't know. But sideways and vertical movement is going to cause thousands of layers rapidly. And it's going to deposit the fossils because it's always lifted and shuffled and resettled, just like you get a jar of dirt, sand, rocks, mud, and put a couple of dead critters in there and shake it up and sit down and watch it. It's like this sand toy, Mr. Nelson. You could learn a lot from a $9 sand toy at Walmart. Go buy one, okay? Noah's flood would have done all this, but you are one of those who has chosen to be willingly ignorant of the flood. Put your name by 2 Peter 3, please.
You can't grow a plant this big in just 1 year. This took many years. Just the layers around it took many years, perhaps several decades until the tree died.
Okay, well then you please show me the fracture marks in these solid layers at the base. There aren't any, I can assure you, okay? And the root system. So you're saying this tree is going to survive all this inundation while it grows. Ask any gardener. They tell you if you're going to build up soil around any tree, you never want to go more than half the diameter of the tree in 1 year. You got a 12-inch tree, don't go more than 6 inches of soil depth. Because the roots some of the roots have to be on the surface to get aerated. Some are support roots, some are tap roots. So you don't want to raise the level of the dirt more than half the diameter of the plant.
And then the exposed part fell over and decayed or became part of the surrounding coal seams, while this part was protected from erosion and then got buried under further strata, implying two things. This took a long time.
It does not imply any such thing. Okay? This could take 3 weeks with Noah's flood and the tide going up and down. Today the tide starts coming up and then it bangs into South America and has to stop because it gets interrupted. So because the tide is constantly interrupted by the continents, we don't see the harmonic effect. But in places where they have the right topography, like Bay of Fundy, Canada up here, the tide, the world's record was up there, Bay of Fundy right there. As the water's coming up, it swashes backwards into this bay. You can get the same thing when you get a cake pan full of water, pour it out one corner. The cake pan might only be 1 inch deep, but the part going out the corner is 4 inches deep. Because all the water's being funneled into one spot. Well, the Bay of Fundy and Anchorage, Alaska, many places have this problem where the tide becomes huge. I was up at the Bay of Fundy and I said, how high does the tide get here? He said, oh, it changes regularly 60 feet. 60-foot tidal change every 6 or 7 hours. But once in a while you get the sun and moon lined up, they're both pulling. And it just happens to be, because the moon goes in a slight oval, if the moon is slightly closer, that increases it. So if the moon is closer, and both the moon and Earth are slightly closer to the sun, because our orbit is elliptical, if you happen to get all three of those together, they had a 101-foot tidal change one time at the Bay of Fundy. Google it. World's highest tidal change. Doesn't matter. The point is, the flood of Noah and the shuffling of these sediments would do all of this in a hurry, and you guys refuse to admit there was a flood.
And it happened a long time ago.
You don't know what happened a long time ago. It could happen yesterday. The geologic column is in all the textbooks, and they give them ages of so many millions of years ago, and it's all baloney. You see, it's a fact. The Earth has layers of sedimentary rock. We've got them here on our property. Come see the gravel pit, layers of gravel. The evolutionists have an interpretation that say the layers formed slowly over millions of years. The creationists have an interpretation that say those layers are from the flood of the days of Noah. Now, you guys are always trying to erase this line and, like you just did, make your interpretation part of the fact. It is not. It's a fact. The Earth has layers. Amen. It is not a fact. There are different ages by millions of years.
A fact is a point of objectively verifiable data, and the different ages of the various strata can be literally, absolutely verified to be in the millions of years.
Can be absolutely verified to be in the millions of years. This is baloney, as I'll talk this another night. I want to get a few of my slides here to show you just a couple of common sense things for you, Mr. Nelson, Sun God disciples, okay? So, Mr. Nelson, I'm sorry, you're simply confused or lying, and you've been corrected on this before, okay? But you don't seem to be able to learn anything. You've already decided what you want to believe on all this, and so I'm sure I can't change you. But maybe some of your disciples will use their head, okay? Now, my little sand toy shows clearly that multiple layers can be deposited very rapidly in just a matter of minutes, okay? It doesn't take a long period of time. This textbook right here, Earth Science book, Namowitz Spalding Earth Science, 1989, shows right here the picture, and you can read the whole section about it, how that moving water automatically sorts things by density. Whoa, okay, I agree, it does. See, when water's moving sideways, like would certainly happen during Noah's flood. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Carbon dating. Okay, $15, a whole hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever it was, on carbon dating. If you want to know more about that. Okay, as water's moving sideways, it deposits multiple layers at one time. There's a great video clip. The guy speaking is a little boring on it, but some French guy. What's it in Canada? It's actually took place in the Navy has a huge tank where they study sedimentation rates because they want to be concerned, is this canyon where we park our submarines still empty or is it full of dirt now? Because it's always changing. The bottom of the ocean floor is changing much worse than the land we live on because sediments are moving around. So they keep track of this stuff. So they have a big long flume, a couple feet wide and maybe this high, and experiments in stratification. Just Google that and watch the video clip of how he shows it. You can see it in front of your eyes, okay, in real time. Multiple strata are formed at the same time, sideways. So that does not mean this bottom one is older than this one. A fossil found up here, way back at this point, could be actually older than a fossil found down here that just got deposited a few seconds ago. So the order of burial doesn't mean anything. You guys are stuck on that dumb uniformitarian idea that they have to be deposited in order this way. Not when they're going sideways, it doesn't. Mr. Nelson, you've been corrected on this many times, but you simply refuse to learn. I'm sorry about that, okay? Underwater landslides are called turbidity currents. If the mud underground is landslide, instead of calling it a landslide, they call it a turbidity current. 1929, the transatlantic cable was cut by one going 70 miles an hour. 40,000 square miles of ocean floor was covered. They calculated by the time they had the cables across the Atlantic Ocean, you know, the transatlantic cables back in the early 20s, and they could tell when power went off or when the signal went off, bang, 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 as this mudslide came across. They said, man, these cables are 100 miles apart. They calculate the speed based on when it cut the cable. They could tell clearly. It went 70 miles an hour underwater. Just Google turbidity current. That's what Noah's flood would do all over the place. Moving water would also create swirls and eddies in any obstacle, and it's going to automatically sort fossils even more. And it's interesting, fossils and dinosaurs especially, lots of animals, are found, and the bones are still together. They're still articulated. If they died and laid on top, the critters would drag them all around the woods, the coyotes and the buzzards and the ants and everything. In Wyoming, in 1934, a famous dinosaur discoverer who owned the ranch, on the ranch owned by Baker Howe, lived at the foot of Bighorn Mountains. The concentration of fossils was remarkable, he said, like they were piled like logs in a log jam. Now, why would you get a bunch of dinosaurs piled up like logs in a log jam? I have a theory about that. There was a flood in the days of Noah, and it's going to pile lots of critters into piles, and they're going to turn into fossils. This one's in Menno Ceres Springs Bonehead Fossil Pit in Nebraska. That's the way they find it. Do you think that's ever going to happen in nature normally? Show me a place where that's happened today or in the last 100 years, a recent one. Even all the buffalo they killed out west. How many buffalo did they kill trying to starve the Indians into submission? Tens of thousands of them. They would go into an area and just run all the buffalo off a cliff to kill them all so the Indians wouldn't have anything to eat, so they'd have to come and say, we surrender. Tens of thousands of buffalo were killed. Show me a buffalo graveyard from in the last 300 years. You might find some from Noah's flood, but you're not going to find any from the last 300 years, even though tens of thousands were killed. Here's some hoof-type animals, small little hoofed animals, found in Nebraska in the swimming position. Oftentimes they're found in the swimming position with their head arched back like they're trying to get one more breath when they're caught in some kind of mudslide or in muddy, turbid water. Even fish would die in the muddy water, and oftentimes fish fossils are found with the gills extended, trying desperately to get some oxygen out of this water because they got to breathe underwater, you know. Why would they die with their fins extended and their gills extended? Why would they die like that? Don't most animals, when they die, kind of, relax? Not the way they're found. Robert Broom, the South African paleontologist, estimated there are 800,000 million, that is 800 billion with a B, vertebrate animals in the Karoo Formation in Africa. Why would you get 800 billion animals in one spot? There was a flood. In Belgium in 1878, a remarkable concentration of iguanodon skeletons were discovered 1,000 feet below ground in a coal mine. Thus, it could be seen that the fossil boneyard was evidently one of gigantic proportions, especially notable because of its vertical extension through more than 100 feet of rock. So you got 100 feet of rock containing thousands and thousands of fossils. There was a flood. It's not complicated. Up at Axel Island, Canada, they find a petrified redwood tree stump. They found several redwood trees petrified in Axel Island. Where on earth is that? Right up here, Axel Island. In case you don't know, it gets cold up in Canada, okay? It gets really cold in northern Canada. Redwood trees only grow in a few spots in the world. None of them grow in Canada. None of them grow on Axel Island. There are no trees at all up there. Nothing. How do you get these giant redwood trees found on Axel Island? I think maybe there was a flood. Here's David Reeves, good friend of mine from Tennessee, davidreevesministry.org. His dad, Richard Reeves, runs the museum, the Ron Wyatt Museum. David here standing by a petrified tree in Tennessee. And he will assure you there are no roots that grow down into the soil below it. It is petrified standing up. When Mount St. Helens blew, 1980, my sister lived not too far from there when it blew. Fortunately, it blew the smoke and everything the other way, but she was within range if she'd been on the right side of it. It blew trees down, probably by the million. I tried to Google how many trees were blown down by Mount St. Helens, and all it gave me was square miles. Okay, but it was certainly hundreds of thousands of trees blown down. It plugged up the river systems. The trees got blown down to the river, floated down, plugged up, washed out bridges because of the tree jam, log jam. Here's a logging company with all the trucks knocked over by these, and these are huge trees. Not like we have around here. I mean, here is a tree. Here is a semi. Have anybody ever been to Washington or Oregon and seen them trees out there? I mean, they'll be 15-foot diameter. California, yeah. These are real trees, not like around here. We got, they get 50 feet tall, and, oh, wow, look at that tree. It blew so many trees down, they hauled out hundreds and thousands of truckloads of trees to save the wood for whatever they could. I Googled it today, Scientific American. The cataclysm. All of the trees seemed to come down at once. You think? Yeah. They know it was a volcano did it because they saw it happen. Don't you think Noah's flood would have knocked down lots of trees all over the place? Mount St. Helens is right here. It blew generally this direction. It blew so many trees into this lake. It actually raised the level of the lake from the mudslides also. But it blew trees in there by the tens of thousands, okay, of trees in Spirit Lake. Here's logs floating on Spirit Lake. I Googled it today just to see what happened to the logs in Spirit Lake. They said today, more than 3 decades after the eruption, floating log mats persist on Spirit Lake. They've been floating there for 30 years. Yeah, log mats floating in the lake. Changing position with the wind, so the wind blows them back and forth across the lake. The rest of the trees, especially those that were not completely detached from their roots, were turned upright by their own weight and became waterlogged. So they got heavy on the root end, which would be normally heavier, and they sank to the bottom. Waterlogged in the standing position. Sinking into the muddy sediments at the bottom where they have become petrified. Whoa, excuse me, Wikipedia admits that trees can get petrified in less than 30 years? Yeah, they're buried in the mud at the bottom of Spirit Lake. It's happening now. See, this is what's called observable science. This is not fairy tale SpongeBob stuff. Just imagine taking millions of years to petrify. No, boys and girls, it can petrify quickly, and it's happening in Mount St. Helens. Go look, okay? Many of the trees began floating in the upright position and slowly sinking to the bottom, getting stuck in the mud at the bottom. There's a whole herd of them right here floating in the upright position. Floating. A friend of mine went out there and took a video of her and her husband. They took a boat out to one of these trees. Only the branches were still on it. And they said, look at this. And they pushed it, and it started swinging back and forth. It looked like it was growing in the lake. No, it was floating. It was pushed it back and forth. I need to get that video footage and put that in somewhere. The petrified trees would float generally root end down because that's the heaviest part. Scientists estimate there are 20,000 trees in the bottom of Spirit Lake. Many of them are buried upright, and some are already 15 feet deep in sediments, and they've already petrified. Petrified trees standing up, running through multiple layers of sediments. You think? Now, this makes it even worse, Mr. Nelson, and you and your club moss example, which was a drawing, not a photograph, okay? Some polystrate fossil trees are upside down, extending through many layers, including layers of coal. So it's interesting enough to get a petrified tree standing up, but when you have one upside down, stuck in the mud with layers around it, petrified. Are you telling me that tree grew the wrong direction for millions of years looking for sunlight? I'm going to really doubt that one, okay? In Germany, France, and the British Isles, Nova Scotia, California, and several eastern states, fossils that extend through several layers of sedimentary rock have been found. These are called polystrate fossils. They are usually tree trunks in an upright or somewhat slanted position. Polystrate fossils furnish clear evidence that sediment was deposited rapidly. Down at the bottom it says this one is 7.6 meters tall. That's 25 feet. So you're saying that was deposited slowly, seasonal inundations, you said. How much would it take to do 25 feet of seasonal inundations while the tree is still living? You need to take a biology class on how trees, they need, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, all the different gases, mostly the carbon dioxide the trees need. They need the wind to blow to keep the leaves going, increase the CO2 absorption. They need root systems. They're not going to survive this kind of stuff. Joggins, Nova Scotia has hundreds of them. Petrified trees in the vertical position. Standing petrified trees in Yellowstone National Park. There's me, about 10 pounds ago, standing next to a petrified tree in Yellowstone. Standing up. There's a whole place called Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone National Park. There are 27 consecutive layers of trees growing through multiple layers. They're not different ages. They have a sign by this one. Most of the world's caverns were formed over hundreds of thousands of years by the dissolving of limestone by groundwater. Caverns are found in various areas, and they mention some here. Then they say trees. Trees made of stone. The photograph shows petrified wood in Petrified Forest National Park, Arizona. The petrified wood was once part of a living tree. I agree. 180 million years ago. I disagree. How did the wood of a once living tree become stone? Well, things can petrify rapidly. We covered that on video number 7, I believe. Now, I would predict this tree got petrified standing up underwater during Noah's flood. Then over the next few hundred, maybe a few thousand years, the dirt washed away from it. And if you have a petrified tree standing up that's too tall, something may happen to cause it to fall over. What would happen to a log made into rock if it fell over? It would break in 100 places. Just like that. Petrified forest. This stuff happened as a result of Noah's flood and then the tree falling over sometime later. Some guys went scuba diving from Institute for Creation Research in Dallas, Texas. It used to be in California. They went scuba diving in Lake Mount St. Helens under these petrified trees. Here's their heads right here. They're going to go scuba diving under the trees. They notice the trees, as the wind blows them up and down the lake, they're rolling against each other, rubbing all the bark off. So the bark sinks to the bottom and becomes a layer of coal. So, Mr. Nelson, I am sorry, you're simply insane. If you think this happened slowly over millions of years, you're mistaken, okay? I've corrected you on this before. I'll correct you again if you need it, and you will, I'm sure, because you don't want to believe the obvious. There was a flood. It completely covered the world. Lots of people wrote about it after the flood. Most of them, oral legends and stuff, would get twisted and exaggerated, I'm sure Shem told the story and said, I was the hero in the plot, and Ham would say, no, it was me, and Japheth, no, those guys are both morons, it was me, And they tell their kids, we're the greatest ever born because, look at him, he's a moron, and, look how smart we are, and that kind of stuff, okay? So there would be legends that would be twisted, obviously. We get that all the time now, okay? So, but then Moses was told by God to record this, or to gather these records, apparently. Moses went to school in Egypt as a kid, remember? He was going to be the next Pharaoh. He would have access to the biggest library in the world in Alexandria, Egypt. He probably found these old records and said, whoa, there's records in this library of people writing about different things. Abraham wrote a couple chapters. Noah wrote a couple chapters. He put it all together, edited it into one book called the Book of Genesis from eyewitness accounts. We covered that on video 7 of my series. All right. I didn't know if I had enough energy for that. It's only a 5-minute clip of Mr. Aaron Ra, the sun god, but I'm out of gas, folks. Got to go.